Thanks, Katie. More than 2,000 people have blockaded London's Westminster Bridge in protest over the government's plans to shake up the NHS in England. The demonstrators, including health service workers and anti-cuts campaigners, said the proposals will be bad for the NHS, for patients and society. The Health and Social Care Bill is due to go before the House of Lords this week. Jane Death reports.
Block the bridge! Block the bill!
Doctors, nurses, patients. They met on Westminster Bridge to try to put themselves between the Health and Social Care Bill and Parliament's statute books.
Who's NHS? Our NHS!
To me, this means essentially the end of our NHS. This is heading full on towards privatisation.
NHS!
The government says the bill would open up the NHS in England to healthy competition, equalling more power to the patient and better care. After some redrafting, the bill did make it through the House of Commons. These protesters want the House of Lords to kill it off.
Demonstrating on this bridge is symbolic because it links one of London's biggest hospitals and Westminster, where the Lords will debate these NHS reforms. The aim is to cut off the blood supply to this controversial health bill.
John Ashton is Cumbria's Director of Public Health. He told me he's scared private companies will strip the NHS of the profitable bits, leaving what's left to rot. He said peers mustn't let it happen.
Once they pass this legislation, very large parts of the health service will have to be opened up to provision by anybody from the private sector. Big American companies are likely to come in.
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is that they will cherry pick the things that make a profit easily, things like hip replacements and all of that kind of stuff. What they will never be interested in are the expensive and complicated things.
The NHS workers here said they'll lose the trust of their patients.
I work in the NHS not for profit, not for a big buck, not for a big wage. I work in it solely to look after my patients. What I don't want to see is that changed. I don't want to see the profit motive brought into healthcare.
It looks like some peers will agree with him. They want the health bill sent to a special select committee for closer examination. Labour want it ditched completely.
It unpicks the fabric of the NHS. It takes the N out of the NHS and turns it into a free-for-all, a huge postcode lottery, and we're not prepared to accept that.
They say cut back! We say fight back!
The Department of Health today insisted its push for patient power, clinical leadership and a focus on results had wide support. And without this bill, the NHS won't have a future.
Well, with me now is Doctor and former Labour Health Minister Lord Owen, who is urging his fellow crossbench peers to scrutinise and amend the bill when it comes before them on Tuesday. How much concern is there in the House of Lords?
I think a lot. I think many people are very worried about this bill. Personally, I believe if this bill was to be introduced in 10 years' time, the NHS would be unrecognisable. It's far more far-reaching than people understand. And it's a great sadness to me personally. I think the NHS stands for some ethical and altruistic elements in society. It's extraordinary, really. That David Cameron, who promised us no major reorganisation during the election, has put his name to the biggest reorganisation of the health service from the top down that there's ever been since 1948.
So what are you trying to achieve?
I can only hope to improve the bill. We can't wreck it. We can't vote against it. We're a revising chamber. The House of Commons is unelected, appointed chamber.
You mean you shouldn't vote it down, you mean? Or, I mean,
well,
because you
could. Technically, I don't think you could. Certainly, the votes aren't there. I understand why Labour feels very frustrated and angry about it. But nevertheless, as a crossbencher, all I'm going to do is to try to improve the bill. That's all I can do. I think a select committee can look at the powers of the Secretary of State for Health and the duties. At the moment, he's abdicating from practically every power. There are very few parliamentary controls, constitutional issues have been set aside. This needs to be looked in the round by a group of experienced parliamentarians in the House of Lords coming back with amendments worked out that could, I think, restore some of the necessary powers for the Secretary of State.
But hasn't there just been a massive review of this bill?
That was
very
doctor-orientated. That was done at the forum. I think it did make some useful changes. I mean, the mere fact that the bill had to go in for a great pause, they had to revamp great sections of it. but the fundamentals have not really changed. What we can do in the House of Lords is say the NHS is a ration service. It's always been. One of the reasons it's acceptable, and we don't pay anywhere near as much as many other countries for it, is that it is overall understood to be under democratic control. There is answerability, and people have to look to Parliament, and by and large, Parliament has protected the National Health Service.
So your fear here is that the Health Secretary will no longer be responsible for delivering health in England?
No, he's deliberately taking himself out of the responsibility to secure a comprehensive health service. He says he'll promote it.
So it'll be blame the GPs, basically, if things go wrong?
Yes, there's a lot of other people will be down there. It is privatisation. People say it's not, but it effectively will mean that there will be a commercialisation of health service, and the values will be that of the market. Now, we've had an internal market for some years. This is a straight-out external market. But the most important thing that the House of Lords can do is restore parliamentary authority, some safeguard. If there's a failure in the health service, then when people want to turn to Parliament, we don't have a Secretary of State who says he can't do anything about it.
Lord Owen, thank you very much.